All right, so last section, section one, we saw the development of the Newtonian machine universe, right? A universe based on logic and order because we were starting to discover the universal laws that governed that universe using rationalism, reason. So this became or evolved into an idea that if we can use rationalism to discover the laws of the universe, what if we can apply rationalism to discover the best laws to govern society? And this movement to apply rationalism to society to make it better, it was called the Enlightenment, a philosophical movement that had a huge impact on the development of the United States and modern history in general. Now, the first guy we're going to look at will sound familiar to you, John Locke. He's the guy we learned about in chapter 14, the social contract guy. Said that government should be based on mutual obligations between we, the people, and the government. And if the government violates that contract, we, the people, have the right to rebel and create a new government. Well, another one of his very important theories was the tabula rasa theory of the mind. Tabula rasa is Latin for blank slate. John Locke said that when we are born, we are neither good or evil. That our mind is essentially a blank slate when we are born, a tabula rasa, right? So then he began to wonder, well, then what makes a person uniquely them? What makes you you? And he said, well, it must be their experiences. That's what fills up the blank slate of your mind. Well, logic says if your experiences, what you go through, make you who you are, if you have better experiences, you'll become a better person, right? So if you give better experiences, you get better people. Well, if you get better people, then you get a better society. It's very logical. It's very reasonable. Well, then how do you figure out what those better experiences should be to give to people? You use rationalism, logic, right? So eventually there will be this group of men, mainly in France, but also in England, mainly from the middle class, called philosophers, right? And these philosophers are going to try to apply logic and reason to figure out what are the best laws to govern society, right? And a lot of these guys, even if you've never heard of them before, have had a huge impact on your life because of the country you have grown up in, the United States. Like, for instance, Montesquieu. Maybe you've never heard of Montesquieu, but he's a big deal. See, Montesquieu, he said, constant experience shows us that every man invested or given with power is apt or likely to abuse it and to carry his authority as far as it will go. Basically, he's saying if you give someone a bunch of power, they will abuse it, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So Montesquieu, he didn't like absolutism. He didn't like the idea of one person having too much power. So he developed this idea that there should be three branches of government. That should sound familiar to you: an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. That's how many branches America has, right? The executive branch, president; legislative branch, Congress; and the judicial branch with our court system. And so he said, divide the government up into these three branches, right? And give each branch certain powers that check the powers of the other branches, right? Literally separate the powers to make sure one person or one group doesn't have too much power. For instance, in our own country, Congress writes laws, right? But it's the president who signs the laws. He can veto the laws and say, I'm not gonna sign this into law. But then if he vetoes a law, it goes back to Congress and they can override the veto. Right? So that's one branch checking the power of the other branches. The president appoints members of the Supreme Court, but once they're on the court, they're on it for life. That way they don't owe anybody anything, right? And so if Congress passes a law and the president signs the law, right, the Supreme Court can decide that that law is unconstitutional and throw it out, right? Because so they've separated the powers so each branch can check the power of the other, right? And this goes back to Montesquieu, this French philosopher. See, a lot of the ideas that we think are of American aren't American. They're Enlightenment ideas. They're French ideas with a scattering of English ideas. And Montesquieu is a great example of that. Another great example is Voltaire. Voltaire, fascinating guy. He was an author and a philosopher and a playwright and a poet, and he never found a fight he didn't want to join. Right? Not physical fight, of course, but an argument, right? He had quite a mouth on him, got him in trouble quite a bit of times. Actually got him imprisoned a couple of times and thrown out of multiple countries, right? Because whenever he saw what he viewed as injustice, he was going to speak out against it. And one injustice he saw was the way religion was dealt with in Europe. He did not think it was rational. Now, Voltaire was raised Catholic. He even thought about becoming a Catholic priest. But he was not a Christian. He's what we call a deist, right? Deism is very logical, right? Deists believe that there is some sort of divine creator that started everything, right? A higher power. But deists do not believe that that higher power now intervenes in his creation, right? So a deist, for instance, does not believe Jesus was the Christ. They don't believe in miracles. They don't believe scripture was divinely inspired. They don't believe any of that. They believe there's a divine something that made everything, but that divine something no longer intervenes. That divine something, that higher power, right, created the universe with all of its laws, got it started, and now leaves it alone. Sometimes the god of deism is called the clockmaker god. He put all the pieces of the clock together, he wound up the clock, and then he steps back and the clock just runs itself, right? Clockmaker God, right? This is a very logical view of religion, right? And with this view of religion, what a person believes doesn't necessarily matter, right, to a deist, right? As long as you let a deist be a deist, he's going to let you be whatever you want to be, right? And quite a few of our founding fathers were deists, like Thomas Jefferson, for instance. He was a deist. Benjamin Franklin was a deist. Right? And so deists, like Voltaire, like Jefferson, like Franklin, big fans of freedom of religion, right? Because to them, right, there is no such thing as divinely inspired scripture, so you shouldn't force it on to people anyway. Just let each person decide what they want, right? Voltaire said, think for yourself and let others enjoy the privilege to do so too. Well, you look at our Constitution, right? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Freedom of religion. There's another Enlightenment idea in our government. We had the three branches and the separation of power from Montesquieu. Then we have Voltaire and other philosophers like Thomas Jefferson supporting freedom of religion, right? Voltaire and Jefferson argued that forcing religion down people's throats only leads to pointless conflict, which we saw plenty of in Europe, like the 30 Years' War, for instance. 8 wars of religion in France, right? And so they were like, look, if you just let everyone follow their conscience and let them decide their religion, I think society will be better. To them, that was very logical, and it was very orderly, and it was very rational. Separate the government and religion, which found its way into our Constitution.